Most of the leaves have sighed their last and fallen off the big maple in my backyard. The brisk autumn breezes taste of impending winter, and I haven't shaved my face in 2 weeks. This is normal, for I am in studio mode. Sweatshirt weather doesn't last forever in Minnesota, and before you know it, it's time to dig the winter coats out of mothballs and grimace through the raging bitter elements. However, I'm determined to make the best of autumn this year, before the flakes start falling. A true sign of autumn, an elementary school crossing guard in traditional garb. This is where I describe how well things are going in the studio, and by extension, how excited I am to release new music out into the world, like turning over a butterfly net full of vibrant monarchs. It can be tough to fall asleep when I'm off the road, spending my days and nights at home working on new material. Believe it or not, it takes a few weeks to get used to the stillness of an empty bedroom versus the muffled roar of a bus generator and the distant rumble of tires on pavement. When I'm home, I shave off a lot of hours staring at the ceiling, thinking about whatever song I'm working on at the moment, what direction it's headed in, or what kind of emotional chords it should strike. It's often the case that mere brainstorming gives me just as many goosebumps as playing back the final mastered wave, because it's all in there, so to speak, and I can hear it long before I create it. I love how music does that to you. It has the power to make the artist completely alive before she ever sits down to create it. Like fire and ice, it's where vision and inspiration collide, and that's where the real beauty originates. Alfred Hitchcock was quoted as saying the following: "Once the screenplay is finished, I'd just as soon not make the film at all. I have a strongly visual mind. I visualize a picture right down to the final cuts. I'd write all this out in the greatest detail in the script, and then I don't look at the script while I'm shooting. I know it all by heart, just as an orchestra conductor needs not look at the score. When you finish the script, the film is perfect, but in shooting it you lose perhaps 40% of your original conception." Granted, I'm just a simple Minnesota boy, far from a legendary British filmmaker, but something about what he says rings like a bell to me. The imagining of a given piece of work is nearly as beautiful as the product of such labor. If only we could share these imaginings with others. That would be a fascinating thing. If I could upload the dream or vision of a new Owl City record for you to download, now that would be something. If this was possible, there would suddenly be no limits, no boundaries or borders. It would span the senses and go far deeper than any of us could imagine. A band could release an album and it could take us places in our minds as though we were actually there in the middle of it. It would be a dream itself, and at risk of sounding super cheesy, it would almost be an experience. An interesting thought better saved for a rainy day. Regardless, there's something wonderful about locking the doors, turning off the lights, and settling into a room surrounded by all sorts of instruments and gear, just waiting to be switched on, operated, played, manipulated, maneuvered, you name it. Ironically, this atmosphere is often all the inspiration one needs to create an entire song, at least instrumentally speaking, and not even think twice about it. Sounds, chords, melodies, tones, textures, all spark the imagination, and I could probably write an instrumental record every year for the rest of my life. Piece of cake. The possibilities are endless, and the river of inspiration never seems to run dry. For me, lyrics take a bit more work, but it goes without saying that the result of daydreaming and/or pulling from inspiration is incredibly worth the effort, should it ever become defined as merely that. As it stands, I'm about 3/4 of the way finished with a new collection of songs, and I couldn't be more excited about them. A lot of people have asked what I plan to do at the outset of this record, namely whether I'd record it in a corporate studio or stick to the basement, or Batcave in layman's terms, and I opted for the latter. Somehow, I feel as though a ticking clock would rush me into thinking I had to make everything perfect 5 minutes ago. And suddenly the idea of making a new record reminded me of when I used to load package trucks for UPS. Work. Then again, I always seem to forget how much work it takes to make an entire record from scratch. And when you do everything yourself, aside from having it mastered, the process claims a lot of your time and energy as well. But as I told my mother a few nights ago, hey, as long as I can just make music and buy groceries, I'll be the happiest boy in the world until the day I die. We're in the home stretch now. My buddy Matt Thiessen weighed in on the album, and there are a few other collaborations in the works as well. There's a few different ways to play out a subsequent record, and from day one, I wanted none of them to leave me in a sophomore slump. It would be a disservice to put out a new album that sounded way too similar to anything I've done in the past, yet there's always the risk of changing a bit too much. Thus, there are a few places on the new record that step outside the owl box for a moment before returning, and I'm really excited about the idea of exploring new territory within those moments, because it'll be something I've never done before. Naturally, this is no reason to stand up and scream, "Owl City has changed its sound!" Because of course, there's nothing more surprising than when a band releases a record that sounds absolutely nothing like their past works, so naturally I shan't stray too far from familiar borders. but I can think of several places on the record where we'll go down a rabbit hole or two before returning to the city. To me, there's nothing more exciting than when the mind has the freedom to explore, discover, and imagine. And that's exactly what I plan to do. A list of instruments and gear featured on the album via photographs. Gratuitous wall of guitars. The consequence of playing drums has its repercussions. Juno G and Voyager. Stress disorder. This has nothing to do with music. My dad put Christmas lights in my fake living room tree. Good work, Pops. More guitars. Take it easy on the gooseneck. And finally, who can resist the recreation of a classic? So there you have it. The long and short of it is, I'm plugging away on the new record, things are going swimmingly, and I couldn't be more excited for you to hear the new music. I might describe it as rather orchestral at present. It's a very dynamic, polished effort. The soft parts are quiet and cozy, the loud parts are thunderous and powerful, and a river of wind sweeps you off your feet and carries you between worlds of both. The lyrics are abstract at times, simple and honest at other times. It's a dreamy endeavor, coated with an ethereal veneer and flavored with a faint hint of melancholy. The tracks seem to glue together. Lots of string quartets, 1/16 arps, delayed envelope synths, a bit of brass, huge drums, wide claps, dreamed out vocal harmonies, unison saw leads, sequenced field recordings, desert dry kick drums, oceans of reverb. The future is bright, and by all means, it's beautiful.